Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Welcome to this episode of Academic Writing Amplified. I'm Kathy, and I'm just popping in here to let you know to get ready. We are going to be opening the doors to our Navigate Your Writing Roadmap program really soon. Navigate is our program that helps you get those publications out the door. We figure out how you're going to make time to write, how you're going to organize your publication pipeline, and we give you all the tools and skills you need to get through that pile of almost done articles or stop sitting on that ton of data and get your publications out in the world and working for you and your career. Now, enrollment for Navigate is going to be open for a small window from November 25th to November 29th. But I want you, my favorite podcast listeners, to be able to participate in a really great bonus. And that bonus is our early bird New Year's writing retreat special for the first 15 people who enroll. So here's how it works. The wait list for Navigate is open. You can find the link in the show notes. And everybody's going to go join the wait list. So go do that right now. You can pause this episode, go join the wait list, because on November 22nd, so that's like 3 whole days before everybody else, we are opening up Navigate enrollment to only the people on the wait list. And the first 15 people to enroll get to come to our New Year's writing retreat for free. This is a 3-day writing retreat that we do at the end of January to infuse your 2023 with writing energy and joy and calm and all those things that we are trying to create in the new year. So go get on the wait list. Then you'll be able to enroll on November 22nd. And the first 15 people to enroll get to come to our 3-day virtual writing retreat in January for free. Okay, so go get on the wait list now. Hello. Kathy Mazak here, and I am so excited to get into today's podcast topic. We're going to do a little, almost like a series or just a theme, I guess, for the month of November. And we're going to hit on some of the biggest trends in work in 2022. So I think, as we kind of wrap up the year, it's a great time to reflect how these big trends that we see and the buzzwords like quiet quitting and act your salary and the great resignation, right? How all of those apply to us here in academia. Sometimes in academia, we think that we think that it's not a job. It's like something more than a job, which absolutely, I hope that your scholarly area is a passionate calling for you. And at the same time, the container through which we are doing that work is absolutely a job. So I don't think that we can divorce ourselves, put ourselves in the ivory tower away from all of these kind of bigger social trends that are happening. So today's topic is quiet quitting. And boy, have I been, doing this podcast in my head for several months now. So we're going to talk about quiet quitting. I don't know if you're on TikTok, but from what I can tell, the origin of this term came up through the social media platform TikTok. And I, had heard about it. And then I finally read something about it in a CNN article, which we can link in the show notes, where they credited, well, they're not crediting her necessarily with the origin of the term quiet quitting, because definitely the idea comes from way before now. But they did quote, I'm going to read a quote by Kathy Caprino, who is a person who has done quiet quitting. And she has, I think, she definitely has a TikTok channel. I think she's on YouTube, and she does career advice, young woman, right? And she says that what quiet quitting is about is, quote, it's about stopping doing work that people think is beyond what they were hired to do and not getting compensated for. So, usually I'm not into TikTok trends, right? But this is like really, really interesting to me. So I feel like in some ways, this idea of quiet quitting is a logical response to the culture of overwork and the glorification of busy. And man, if we aren't doing those things in academia, then I don't know what we're doing, right? This idea that you show your loyalty, you show your passion, right, for your scholarly work, you show your dedication through overwork. And what I mean by overwork is a little bit what, Kathy Caprino is saying here when she's making her definition of quiet quitting, which is like this, going beyond the number of hours that you're supposed to be working. So it's not just like I think that there's a big difference between like going above and beyond in your drive and passion and ambition, and going above and beyond because we glorify busy. You're working so many late hours. And then when you get to work and people are like, how are you? You're like, I was grading until midnight, like that kind of like almost like, yeah, it's just like so normalized, but absolutely not normal for academics to just like kind of be working 24/7. Like I could always be working. So, if I didn't get to it during, from 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, then I'm going to just take this pile. I used to drag the pile of essays home, deluding myself that I would read them and then drag them back to work. We often work on weekends. Many academics feel like the best time when they can like, quote unquote, catch up is on the weekend, right? A lot of people in our programs say, I'm not supposed to really be working on the weekends. That's what I'm trying to learn not to do in this program. But I find Saturday mornings are so quiet that it's a good time for me to write. Anyway, so what I want to do in this episode is really dig into this idea of quiet quitting, talk about it in the context of academia and absolutely in the context of the overwork and glorification of busy that are kind of characteristics of academic culture. And yeah, just kind of like hash it out here about this latest TikTok trend. So it's almost cliche now to say that the pandemic has made us revisit what's important to us, has made us revisit the ways that we can structure work and where physically we can do work and how many hours and those kinds of things. I'm just going to give you some examples. So an example from myself, let's see. I was on unpaid leave working on my business in 2019, 2020, in that academic year when the pandemic hit. And previous to that, it had been at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, at least in the English department, it had been an uphill battle to convince or we had to get approval for teaching hybrid classes and online classes. There was a lot of rules about it. There was some incentivizing around it, but then there was also a lot of resistance from a lot of people. And so I love the idea of a hybrid class that you could kind of do a flipped classroom, have recorded material online, and especially for language learning, right? Go in and practice speaking together. when you're in person. So I was like a big advocate of like the hybrid classroom. And I kept getting like turned down when I would propose different courses be delivered hybrid. It was like, no, we can't do that. And students won't be able to connect and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, right? Pandemic hits, we have to learn online. And then everybody's learning online. It like completely changed our university. And I think, definitely changed what the students expected. While there are definite problems, we all know them. I don't need to go into a whole thing about, 100% online and all the struggles that we faced and all of those things. If there was an upside for students, like there's many upside for students. One upside for students in some ways was like, especially my students who were working, they could connect from wherever they were, so they didn't have to worry about getting physically to campus. It just made them be able to work more flexibly. And for the population of students that I often taught, many of them were holding part-time or even full-time jobs as they were trying to get their degree. And that online flexibility was actually really helpful for them. Of course, there's other students it wasn't for. It's complicated, all of that. But from the student perspective, there came to be this kind of expectation, right? Like if you can do it online, then why don't you do it online? From the professor's perspective, I also watched, so I haven't gone back to the classroom since the pandemic because I took my leave of absence without pay and then I resigned to run this business full time. But I've watched my husband, right? My husband used to always be on campus. He would be on campus from early in the morning. He would drop off the kids and he would stay on campus until 6, 7, 8 at night sometimes. And now he is all the time at home, all the time. So he teaches twice a week, but he's not going in. He's holding his office hours online. He's doing so much with his students online. The in-person work that they do, because he's an animal scientist and a nutritionist. So when they go into the field and do work with the animals and all of that, obviously it's in person and his classroom teaching is in person right now. But his just like everyday scholarly life, he's doing it from his home office. It just got so comfortable to do it from home as like, why would I not do it from home? So I want you to think a little bit about ways that your expectations around work have changed and also your students' expectations around academia, right? Around how they're going to take classes and the modalities in which they can do that. And then I also want you to think about what your university is demanding of you. So the idea in 2015, if the university was like, you're going to have to come to campus, like everybody would be like, of course we're going to come to campus, right? Now, when universities are saying like, you have to come to campus, there's like a little bit of resistance. If the university told my husband that he had to go to campus, he would be very upset. He's actually more productive at home. He's doing better from home. It's quieter. He's not getting interrupted. He's able to get his reading done, those kinds of things. So the expectations around what it means to have working hours and when they are, I think has shifted even in academia. And it makes total sense to me then that in this climate of why do I have to physically be in an office to work, that young people coming up and trying to envision their working life are going to be resistant to what used to be the way you showed loyalty and dedication and passion. And I think that's where this quiet quitting idea is really coming from and why it's so logical that it's kind of popular right now. I'm going to give you an example. I feel like a super historical example from my own working life. When I first graduated from Indiana University, Bloomington in 1996 with my English major and my math and sociology minors, I had no idea what I could do to get paid, right? Because what I really wanted to do was read and write. But at that point in my life, I don't think I considered graduate school, but I was like unsure. So I'm like, well, let me work and save up some money and then decide what I'm going to do. So I got a job as a technical writer at a company called Open Networks Engineering in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so I moved up to Michigan and I started working for what really was like, we didn't call it a startup in 1996, but it was a startup. And they did software, like telecommunications software. So I was writing the manuals, not understanding the telecommunications software and writing the manuals. I did some marketing. And I always like to tell the children that in 1996, I learned how to code in HTML from a book that I bought at Barnes & Noble, or Borders, I guess, since it was Ann Arbor. It was like this giant HTML code book, and I learned to code, and I built the first website for Open Networks Engineering. So anyway, I was a tech writer, and it was definitely like the cubicle life. And I think it was a typical kind of American company or United Statesian company. It was structured very much like a typical company. And the way that you showed your loyalty and dedication and your drive to maybe move ahead in the company was by getting there early and staying late. So having come like right from my undergrad, and it was like, you know, in like lovely Bloomington, and I would like sit under trees and read or, you know, do my assignments, you know, when I felt like it, and my schedule was whatever I felt like. And then coming to this like very cubicle life was a real kind of shock for me. And I will say that I absolutely hated it. I didn't like the job at all. I didn't like tech writing. Many of the people there were lovely, but it was not for me. But I was, you know, 20 something. I'm just like trying to figure it out. So I stayed. I think I was there for 2 years. I remember part of what I didn't like about the job was that I had to be there for 8 hours a day. And as some of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while know, or as you might know if you've taken our Navigate program, one of the things I teach inside of Navigate is finding your soaring state. And what that means is just finding the time of day where it's like you could get so much done, right? There's other ways to find your soaring state. There's other ways to create the soaring feeling through co-writing and different things. But my initial thoughts or my initial teachings inside of Navigate came from how I experience work, which is that I have 3, maybe 4. If I like sat down at 7 o'clock in the morning, I could work till 11:30, like without really needing to take a break, super focused, energetic, brain is really on. As long as I get like a half decent night's sleep, those hours, I am moving mountains during those hours. And so part of what we teach in Navigate is that if that is true for you, then you need to use those hours for writing, or at least some of those hours for writing, right? Not for all the other, not for checking email, for example, which is what a lot of people do when they first sit down at their desk. It might be their best kind of brain functioning time, but you're checking email with that time. So one of the things we teach in Navigate is kind of replanning how you map different activities onto times of day. And that comes from this experience where I would sit in my cubicle from, you know, I would get there at 8 or 9 and until 11 or 12, I would be like, I could go super fast through my work and that would kind of be done. I would have produced more writing and gotten things more checked off my list than other people did in those hours. Yet I had to stay there until 5 o'clock. And that meant that I had to stay at work through my slogging state, which is what we call that time of day where you feel like you just want to take a nap. And everybody is not like this, but for me, I am very consistent with this daily pattern. Once I hit like 11:30, 12, I want to eat. And then from 1 to 2:30, I really could take a nap. And if I sit down and try to do something, it's really, really hard. So every day I would go to work in this cubicle. I would sit there. I would be super productive for the first half of the day. And the second half of the day, I would hate my life. I would be like, this sucks. I'm bored, whatever my 20-something brain was thinking. And I didn't feel passion for the work. I didn't even really understand what the software that the company was building really, really did. So that brings us to the moment that I decided to leave. And this is where this whole story was going. One day, I had been there for a year and a half. My boss, his name was Curtis, brings me into his office and says, I can tell you're really smart. I think that you could really help this company. And here's what you're going to have to do if you want to get ahead. Like if you want to get promoted, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to come in early and stay late. And in that moment, I said, thank you so much for letting me know. That's really helpful that I can now understand what it takes to get promoted here. And I walked out of the office and I decided to go to grad school. Like that was it. I was like, I am not doing that. Another kind of side story related that I remember from working at Open Networks Engineering is that at some point we expanded and there was an office in France. And so there was like this, people were working in the US in Ann Arbor and people were working in this office in France. And I remember it would come to August and like everyone in France and like most of Europe, everybody in France takes off from the company, right? And I remember Curtis, my boss, being like, you can't take off the whole month of August. Like everybody over here is working. And the French team would just be like, we're not answering the phone because they're not in the office. And also I put on an autoresponder on my email. I remember the frustration of like the American executive team. Like, what do you mean you're going to take the whole month of August off? It's like, and then they would just do it anyway. And I just think like it just showed, right? What I'm telling you is the evidence of a work culture that equates more time of your day to more dedication. And actually that also equates more time in your day to more production. So I think that the quiet quitting idea, which if we take the positive spin on it, right, is I'm going to work these hours. You told me the job was these hours. I'm working these hours. I'm doing this much and I'm not going to do more hours than that. If we look at it that way, I think it makes sense because in my own experience and also working with many, many, many academics over the past 6 years that we have been doing training and coaching and teaching around writing and publishing more, we really have found that for most people, like you want to avoid that time that you're the slogging state, like we call it, that you're sitting there and just staring at the screen. It makes you feel awful. And if you're thinking I'm working, but you're not, it's not helpful, right? So these kind of like extra hours or working more hours is not the way. And I think that the pandemic helped people to see that. Definitely young people who are so savvy and are so, looking out on the world and seeing people creating jobs for themselves that are completely location independent and completely on their terms. I mean, I think that that's a very powerful shift in how we see work. So the side of like quiet quitting that obviously it sounds terrible from the outside, right? Like it sounds like you're going to like go into your office at your company where you're working or whatever, and you're just going to like play Tetris or scroll Instagram or do something else that's not your job. The people who are advocating for quiet quitting are not saying that's what it is, but definitely like the immediate connotation it can be that, right? So I want to just like take the positive part and the negative part and like translate it into our academic contexts. So if we can agree that more hours doesn't necessarily equal more productivity all the time, and if we can agree that people's working hours might vary, like your best hours of the day might not be from 9 to 5, right? You might want to work from 8 to 12 and then work again in the evening or something like that, that flexibility can be helpful. And knowing that about yourself is really, really important. And also, if we can agree that having a job where it just like, and this is what happens inside of academia, right? That it spills over so that it can't be contained in the workday. And also there's too much work. So I have to take it home and I need to grade for hours and hours at night. And I also don't have time to write during the week. So if I'm going to write, I have to do that on the weekends. That is an untenable situation. Now, is that what is like, quote unquote, kind of expected of you because your advisor did that or because other people have done that for years? That's kind of like what you imagine when you don't necessarily imagine that as the professor life, but as you live the professor life, you start to see that this is what like a lot of people are doing. So you're like, I guess that's normal. It doesn't have to be, and it's not the best way. It's not the best way. So I want to kind of address like the quiet quitting idea inside of academia from both the positive and kind of negative sense. Let me do positive first. So if you take the kernel of wisdom inside of this idea of quiet quitting and say, I am going to give all of my heart and soul to this job, but I'm not going to give it more than 40 hours a week, then you can craft your career, or I call it career design. And we're going to be talking more about that this month. You can design your career so that you are doing the most impactful activities. To do that, you have to create boundaries. You have to have a very clear understanding of what your academic mission is. And you have to have some productivity and time management tools and know how to use them for you, like how they're best used for you in order to be able to really create that for yourself. Impactful, but not overflowing into everything, right? Impactful, sometimes intense. We balance intensity out with rest. So if we take that idea of like, I'm going to do a job here in academia, I'm not actually signing my soul away to the university or to the ivory tower when I become a professor or when I graduate with a PhD, right? You can shape this. And so if we take kind of like the agency around quiet quitting and we pull that kernel of it and keep it for ourselves and maybe play with how it might look in our careers, I think that's worth doing. And truthfully, part of what we teach inside of Navigate, right, is like, I use the metaphor of a sound editor's mixing board. And if every little dial on the mixing board is a different aspect of your career, so teaching, student advising, data gathering, grant writing, right? They're all like dials on that metaphorical soundboard. You can't have all of those dials up to 100% volume at the same time. It sounds awful to use the metaphor. And what will happen in reality is that you burn out. So in a way, don't come at me for this. In a way, you're kind of quiet quitting some aspects of your job sometimes as you turn the volume down on those so that you can focus on others. Again, that's if we take the quiet quitting for what the advocates of this term, are using it as. Like, I'm going to contain this work to what it's supposed to be and not let it flow over. And in academia, I think we really have to learn that skill. Like, We need to contain our teaching in moments where we're vigorously grant writing. That doesn't mean that we stop teaching. That doesn't mean that we do bad teaching. It means okay, maybe I'm not going to redo all my lectures this semester. Maybe I'm going to redo some of my lectures, the ones that I know need the most attention, but not all of them. And then that's going to let me contain that aspect of my job in order to work on this other thing, And then in other moments, you won't be grant writing and maybe you'll be curricularly revising. So that's the kind of the nugget I want you to take out of the quiet quitting trend is how can we work to create a job for ourselves, our professorship, our scholarly life that's sustainable, that's enjoyable. All of that is going to make us better scholars. So what can we do to ensure that our scholarly life also accounts for the rest that we need so that when we're working, we're really doing our best work? How can we get to know ourselves and our working rhythms better so that we can use them to our best advantage and respect, our slogging state, just like we respect our soaring state? So that's if we want to take the positive kind of side of quiet quitting. Now let's look at it from the negative side, right? From the side of managers who are no, that's slacking off, right? So to kind of translate that manager saying you're slacking off into the world of academia, there's a few things that one may worry about if you start to hold boundaries, if you start to say, I'm actually not going to let my job overflow into nights and weekends. And that means I'm going to have to say no to things. And I'm going to have to be very careful about how I add commitments to my schedule. I have a client who's in our Elevate program she's in our Amplify program. And she said to me, doesn't we just look like we're slacking off or that we're not a team player, right? And I think that this idea of if we say no to something, if we start to hold more structured boundaries, that we're going to be seen as not team players is a very gendered notion. Because men who hold their, cis white men who hold their boundaries are go-getter professors. But everybody else who holds boundaries is not a team player. So I think it's very culturally loaded, the idea of being a team player. So I want to reframe that to say, again, when you are saying yes to everybody, letting work overflow into your nights and weekends, working yourself into the ground so that at the end of every semester, you kind of collapse, right? And then you rally for the beginning of the next semester. But, there's this binge bust kind of cycle to every year. And you might have several binges and busts inside of a semester, especially if you're going for a grant deadline and then you kind of crash and those kind of things, right? That is not actually the best way to be productive over the long term. So I've used the phrase be productive or production a lot. I don't love it. It's just so very capitalist, right? It's we will produce, we'll make the cogs, we're robots. But I think it's handy in this case because we think that the way to be successful in academia, I'm going to say a lot of women think this, that the way to be successful in academia is to not, how do I say this? I'm going to swear on my podcast, is to not be seen as a bitch, right? To not be seen as that ambitious, cutthroat, unemotional person that is just no, I don't have time to do that. That kind of thing, right? That's an image of a successful woman that many people are afraid to be perceived as. But I don't think that you have to come across that way. Now, if some people think that that's what you're doing, that's their problem. But you can do boundaries. I mean, I always say, but like boundaries are a kindness. Having structures and systems and ways that people can access your time, these things are kindnesses because they make it so that you don't feel frustrated. It's a kindness to you and it's a kindness to other people because then you're not resenting. Like a poor student who like kind of comes and asks for a meeting with you when you don't have time to have a meeting, you're not using a scheduler and you find 15 minutes to talk to the student and then you're mad at the student because you didn't have time for that. Like, no, like we can create structures, we can create ways so that we can accommodate students. We have time for everything in our schedule. We have time for those students. We have time for our writing. We have time for data collection. We have time for analysis. We have time for teaching. We have time for making our teaching better. All of that can be managed. And if you end up saying like, yes to everything because you're afraid you're not going to look like a team player, or you're afraid that you're going to come off as a bitchy, or you're afraid that if you say no to things that the tenure committee's like keeping that in the back of their head for when you go up for tenure. All of those things might happen. All of those things might happen. People may perceive you exactly like that. But you can know there are ways, and this is what we teach in our programs, and I suggest that everybody starts with Navigate for this, is that there are ways to create systems and processes that will hold your boundaries, that will make sure that your time is all flowing towards your academic mission, the work of your academic mission. And if you do that, you are going to feel so much better than if you're saying yes to everybody. Your work's overflowing into the weekends. Your work's overflowing. You're crashing at the end of every semester. Maybe you're crashing midway through the semester. So we don't want to be the people in our department who never do service work, right? Like maybe you want to be that, but you're like, you don't want to be a jerk, right? You don't want to push work around onto other people, usually junior people, usually minoritized people, usually women. You don't want to do that, right? You don't want to do that. So instead, what you want to do, again, like the process of Navigate is teaching this or helping you to figure this out for yourself. You want to have your service more aligned with your academic mission. And when you start thinking about those things that way, then it's much easier to have like criteria on which to base decisions. So your decision making isn't like, what are they going to think of me? Or is there going to be retaliation? But rather, your decision making is about how do I design my career? What do I want it to look like? What's important to me? How can I make sure there's time for all the important things and that everything I do is kind of supporting my academic mission? You're not doing service. You're not just saying no to things all the time. There's a criteria. There's a thought process. There's a way to like, with kindness to yourself and others, make choices that are going to lead to you being a better professor and having a more joyful, sustainable life than maybe what you're doing right now. So to conclude, okay, so this has been a long podcast. So to kind of sum up some of my ideas about academia and quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is this TikTok trend, or has gotten really trendy. It's a buzz phrase for 2022. And the proponents of quiet quitting will say what it just means is I'm going to do my job and I'm not going to go above and beyond. And I wanted to talk about that today because I wanted to take like the kernel of like, well, I wanted to problematize, right, what it means to go above and beyond, what it means to contain your job into a certain number of hours that feel sustainable to you. So maybe you've been watching TikTok, you've heard of quiet quitting, and you are thinking about quiet quitting yourself as a response to overwork or to burnout, right? Because that jokingly, my husband and I have had this conversation as he has felt burnout recently. I've been like sending him the quiet quitting articles, but I don't think it's a bad idea to like really have a good think about what you don't want to do anymore. So a coaching tool that you might use is, all right, this is a phrase you can say to yourself. I am no longer available for, okay? So here's an example. Someone comes to you with a problem that is not really your problem. They want you to drop everything and solve it immediately. So you might say to yourself, I am no longer available for solving other people's last minute problems. And that kind of language, that sentence, like I am no longer available for, I mean, you absolutely can use that with other people. But what I'm suggesting that you do right now is that you make a list for yourself of the things that you're no longer available for. And that's like just a starting place for putting those boundaries up so that you're not leading yourself to burnout, right? So also, as you think about what you might want to cut from your career, I want you to really think about how are you going to make that decision? What tools are you going to use for making decisions that center you? And of course, I would argue that center your writing and publishing. So in our Navigate program, which is going to be open for enrollment from Black Friday to the Tuesday after that, I'll give you the dates in a second. That's exactly the journey we take our clients on. Specifically, we have a module called Align Your Activities, and we have a series of rubrics and a series of exercises. I think it's like the most meaty piece of the program where you're really using your academic mission statement, which is what you write kind of first in the program, to guide decisions about what to cut from your career. And then, of course, what to align. So like I was saying earlier, you don't want to be, that professor who does zero service. I mean, obviously, but what can you do? And this is really a lot about like reframing and thinking, like what would be the service activities that would best align with your academic mission statement? And some of you might be like, they don't align, but this is an exercise, right? Like do the gymnastics in your brain to figure out how you could align your service better, like what projects you could take on, what committees, what service is best for supporting your academic mission. And that way, when your teaching supports your academic mission, when your service supports it, when your work with students supports it, when your community work supports it, all the aspect of your job is supporting the academic mission, you start to channel all your energy instead of feeling like you're pulled in 1,000 directions. So you want to have criteria for decision-making and processes for decision-making. And that just takes so much of the stress out of, who do I say no to? How do I get rid of this commitment and all of that stuff? So I hope today's podcast got your brain going. I didn't want to throw quiet quitting under the bus. Neither did I want to hold it on a pedestal, but rather just wanted to engage with this very popular, trendy idea from 2022. Now, in the next month or so, we're going to be talking on the podcast really about agency in changing your career, your agency in changing your career. There's been a lot of media attention lately about people quitting their jobs as they've been like drugged back out of their work from home lives by force. And I see this as a really amazing opportunity to get what you want in your career. On our team retreat, we came up with this funny tagline for our company, which was a new, better way to academic. We cracked ourselves up with that, but it came out in our retreat because that's what we're really trying to help clients create. A new way, a better way, a way that doesn't lead to burnout, a way that's fulfilling and lovely. We don't have to be academics the same way our advisors were. We don't also have to do all the burnout, all the hoop jumping, all the overwork. We also don't have to be academics the same way our institutions want us to be, because remember that institutions are so slow to change. Our academic institutions are dinosaurs when it comes to cutting edge employment. And so what we really want to talk about on the podcast for the next month is ways that you can really look at the container through which you are doing the work, which is for many of you like a professorship. And how do you have agency over that container, right? We have way more agency than we think over our careers. Of course, that is shaped by our positionality and our identities and our sociocultural context. So it's not just blanket, but there are tools that you can use to kind of take that agency over your career to make it what you want, to influence how your career feels, how much time you dedicate to it, and the shape you want it to take. Because if your career is not nourishing you, then you are not going to bring your best work into the world. So I encourage you to stay tuned for our podcast coming up this month. I'm super excited about them. And you're going to hear in just a second how you can join us for our next round of Navigate program. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Academic Writing Amplified. I'm just popping in here at the end to remind you that our program, Navigate Your Writing Roadmap, is going to be open for enrollment from November 25th through 29th. But I have a secret special deal for all of our biggest podcast fans, and that is that we are opening the doors early with a special bonus. So you'll find the wait list for Navigate. You'll find the link here in the show notes of the podcast. And if you go ahead and get your name on the wait list, then we are going to be opening the doors to Navigate just to the wait list for early birds to enroll on November 22nd. Now, the reason you want to do this is that the first 15 people who enroll in Navigate this year are going to get a free chance to come, or a free ticket to come to our New Year's writing retreat in the end of January. This is an amazing 3-day virtual retreat. You can enjoy it from the comfort of your home. And we make it really special. It's a really great way to kind of get your writer's mindset on track for 2023. And we love to see some of our new Navigate members there. So find out about Navigate by going to the link in the show notes. Go ahead and get on the wait list, and you'll have the chance to come to our New Year's writing retreat for free. All right, go get on the wait list now. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.